All right, so we're entering a new phase of chemistry, continuing on with this overall theme of water chemistry and what happened at Flint, Michigan. In order to understand more of what happened, we need to be able to talk chemistry, the same language of chemistry. And that language has to do with these symbols that I'm just introducing to you. Uh, this is extremely important. And we're going to take it step by step, precept upon precept, line upon line, in order to make sure that you guys get a really good understanding of how to write chemical formulas so that we can go on and do more advanced chemistry. All right, so let us begin. I can memorize names and symbols of selected elements. And yes, you will need to memorize those symbols that you've been writing down. You will have till Wednesday to memorize them. There is a Quizlet. There is a Quizlet on Canvas. You're not coming on Wednesday, then you can take it on Thursday. Whenever you come back, you will be taking this quiz. So let's get as familiar with these as possible. Like I said, there's a Quizlet on your Canvas that you can get the link for and use it to be constantly reviewing. Folks, memorizing stuff is good for you. I had not realized that until I sat down and I talked to Rome Outlaw. You guys know Mr. Outlaw? He is amazing. He's older than Methuselah, and yet I dare say he has a younger mind than most of us. Definitely mind. And I asked him, what is his secret? He says he's always learning. He's always memorizing stuff. So I started, I began 2 years ago. I started learning new languages. So I picked up the hardest language that I could learn, and that was Hebrew. And every day I review my Hebrew vocabulary. I know 500 words. I'm getting to the point where it's just I go through 25 words a day, and I go through it pretty quickly because I'm always reviewing. Always reviewing. Memorizing is good for us. So you will need to memorize. Yes. No, I can read something in Hebrew for you, but I can't say I can read it. I can't actually say it. I can't speak it. About how many naturally occurring elements are there? There are 88. 88. But wait a second. There's 118. What's with it? There are 30 more elements on the periodic table. How can they possibly say that there is only 88? Yes, 30 are man-made. That's right. There are 30 that are man-made. Okay. Yes, most of them, you can see them more clearly back there on the periodic table. The elements that are outlined but not in black, those are man-made. And of course, we have filled in that entire bottom row as well. Question: what is the most abundant element on the earth? And this should not be a surprise. It is an element that you are very familiar with. Just wild guesses out there. Alex, nitrogen, good guess. No. Now, that was a good guess because you know that most of the atmosphere is nitrogen. Okay, but unfortunately, you didn't take in consideration that where you don't have atmosphere, it's just rocks. So, what is the most common element in the rocks, Daniel? Hydrogen, good? No. Dale? Oxygen is correct. The most common compound on Earth is the one that you will encounter when you go to a beach: sand. It's called quartz. And sand is made up of it is tiny little pieces of glass. That's right. It is. Yes. Do you know what happens in a hurricane when the hurricane picks up the sand and starts whipping things? I mean, you can strip the paint off cars. You can strip the paint off of buildings. It's called sandblasting. little pieces of glass. Yes. The way that they make glass is by taking sand and melting it. All right, so we got to go on. Silicon dioxide is the most common compound on Earth. So my question to you is, what is the second most common, what is the second most abundant element on Earth? Raise your hand, please. Sugarman. Nope. Yes. Nope. Alex. Silicon. Why? If glass, silicon dioxide, is the most common compound, that means it is the most plentiful compound on Earth, and it's made up of 2 oxygens and 1 silicon, then you know that silicon's got to be pretty plentiful. Okay? Now, question. What is the 3 most abundant elements in the human body? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Okay, those of you saying water, keep in mind that water is not an element. Matthew. Iron, no. Caleb. Oxygen, carbon is correct, not nitrogen. Yes. Hydrogen. Folks, we are bags of mostly water. We're walking bags of water. So you know that water, H2O, should be the most, at least 2 of the most plentiful elements. Yes.
Don't even answer.
I guess not. Yes. What? There's ooh, I got some butter on the ground. Okay, so here is the listing. Here, notice that oxygen and silicon make up 75% of the Earth. Can you pick that up for me? I don't want it smashed and smeared into the floor. 75% of the Earth is silicon and oxygen. But your body, it's about 80% is carbon and hydrogen plus another 10. So about 90% of your body is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Your bags of mostly water. All right, number 1. What are element symbols made up of? Usually 1 or 2 letters with the first letter always capitalized. Those of you who don't really care about capitalization, you need to care, because I will expect it to be like this. The first letter is capitalized. If you have a second letter, it will be lowercase. I want it like that. As you become familiar with the periodic table and the elements, you will find some elements like Fe, iron. You're sitting there wondering, like Casey, confused. How can iron have an abbreviation of Fe? Fe, iron. How is that? Well, the answer to number 2, symbols may be derived from the Latin names. So if you have one of these elements that have initials that have nothing to do with the name, that's because it's a pretty old element. And it was discovered back when Latin ruled the world. By the way, before English was the international language of science, what language was it? No, not Latin. It was German. German. And before German, it was Latin. You've missed again. And before Latin, it was Greek. My gosh. All right. So iron, Fe, comes from the Latin ferrum. How about this one? Pb, lead. What does that remind you of?
Personal best. Fishing.
Plumbing, your pipes. Now, the earliest people to have indoor plumbing were the Romans. And it was only the Romans aristocracy. So the rich people in Rome had indoor plumbing, and they had lead pipes. Now, folks, it took us several hundreds of years to realize that lead could cause mental disturbances. And now you wonder why things were really, really bad in the 300s and 400s in Rome. No, it wasn't plague. There was a plague of doing of idiocy. I think at some point they elected a donkey to be a senator or something like that. So now you know, if you were rich, you had indoor plumbing. If you had indoor plumbing, you had lead pipes. If you had lead pipes, you had mental disturbances. Daniel. Yes. Copper comes from the Latin name cupra. I don't want any talking, please. I'm the only one that should be talking. My ancestors, the Spaniards, came into Argentina, conquered, and then looked around and realized, wow, there's a lot of silver in this land. So they called it Silverland. Argentina, Argentine, silver. Sodium, natrium, and potassium is kalium. That's where we get these things. One last one. Gold, aurum, A-U-R-U-M, aurum, A-U-R-U-M. What? You can find gold is one of the few elements that will not react with oxygen. You can find it in caves. You can find it attached to rocks. You can find it in the ground. If you found enough of it, yeah. Why do some elements have temporary names? Why do some elements have temporary names? It's because the scientists have just nearly discovered them, and they're arguing back and forth over who to name it after. All of them have now been named. All the ones that have been discovered, I think the last one to be discovered was 4 or 5 years ago, and a couple years ago they were named. You've heard of Tupac Shakur, right? Famous rapper. Tupac Shakur. He had a little brother who was a nerd. And the little brother, Ayupak, was in charge of writing these things. So there's Tupac and his younger brother, Ayupak, the nerd. Ayupak. Actually, Ayupak may not be Tupac's little brother. It may be the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry. And they are in charge of naming these things. They are in charge of these rules. Now, pretty soon we're going to be writing chemical formulas, which means that you will need to know very, very quickly the symbol for these elements, for the most common elements that we're going to encounter. So even though you have access to the periodic table and it's in there, I understand, you're not going to have time to sit there and look for it on the periodic table. It needs to be automatic. Just like there are 500 Hebrew words which make up 80% of the Hebrew Bible. I have those memorized. Why? Because if I'm looking up every word, then it takes a long time for me to translate the verses that I translate every day. So I make sure that the most common words I've got like this, and it only takes me a few minutes. In the same way, we've got 118 elements, but we only use about 40 in this class. So I'm going to ask you by Wednesday to have these memorized. Have them memorized so that then I can teach you what you need to know to write ionic compounds. All right?